Hey everybody, I'm Will Garcia.
And I'm Josh Earl.
And we're the Hoops Guys. And we're continuing our 2014-15 NBA team previews by taking a look at the Washington Wizards, a.k.a. the Zombie Bullets, a.k.a. the Wiz.
Yes. They had a pretty good year in their terms. Finished the regular season 44-38, which gave them the 6th seed out east. They actually wound up beating the number 3 seed, the Chicago Bulls, in the first round before falling in 6 games to the Pacers, who were the number 1 seed, in the second round. But this was a huge victory for this franchise, as it was the first time this team's been past the first round since the 2004-2005 season.
Wow.
So there's a lot of optimism around this team in DC and somewhat nationally, too, to continue along these relatively winning ways.
Yeah, one way that kind of, if it was not, I wouldn't call it a winning way or really a losing way, kind of more like a 500 way. The offense in general finished super average, 16th in offensive rating, but there were some things that did go pretty well, particularly perimeter shooting. This team was 6th in corner 3 shot attempts and 9th in field goal percentage there. Shout out to Trevor Ariza. And then they were also 6th in above the break 3-point percentage.
Yeah, and they were much better defensively, as they were 7th in defensive rating. They didn't give up many quality looks at the rim, finishing tied for 7th at restricted area true shot attempts defensively. They forced a lot of turnovers, winding up 2nd in defensive turnover percentage. And they prevented second chance points for opponents, where they were tied for 7th from defensive rebound rate.
Yeah, but not everything was great for the Wizards this year. They were dead last in free throws per field goal attempt and 25th in free throw percentage. And it's like, come on, you got to get your free throws. You got to make your free throws. They're the most valuable shot in basketball.
Easiest look in the entire game of basketball.
Exactly. And then they also didn't take highly valuable shots. I think they kind of suffered from mid-range pull-up syndrome. This team finished 25th in XPPS. It's an awesome stat from Ian Levy that measures your shot distance and how that relates to the expected value of the shots your team takes. It's over at Nylon Calculus, and there's always a link in the description box below.
Yeah, definitely check that out. That shot selection issue was very clearly evident in the fact that they took the 4th most mid-range true shot attempts, and yet they finished 21st in mid-range field goal percentage.
Yeah.
On top of it, they were only 23rd and above the break 3 true shot attempts, and 24th at in the paint true shot attempts. So they didn't really get a lot of shots from above the break or in the paint, and they didn't really convert their shots in the paint. They wound up 21st in restricted area field goal percentage and 23rd at in the paint field goal percentage.
Yeah, and defensively there were a couple problems too, where they also gave up a lot of shots in that paint, where they were 20th in the paint defensive shot attempts against them, and then they were dead last at field goal percentage in that colored paint area thing. Anyway, opponents shot very well from the corners that the Wizards like to score from, leading to them finishing just 25th in corner 3 defensive field goal percentage.
Yeah. So that was some of the bad things that happened last year, but this team does have a pretty good core in place, especially when you factor in they're in the East. The main player that everyone points to or thinks of when they hear the name the Washington Wizards is, of course, former number 1 overall pick in 2010, John Wall. He's kind of the engine for this Wizards team in that he's what makes them run. He's a very skilled passer, especially adept at getting the ball to spot up shooters in the corner. Hi, Trevor Ariza. He's a blur with the basketball, able to go from basket to basket faster than most players can go without the ball from basket to basket. And on top of it, he's a very good defender at the point guard position. The knock on him going all the way back to college was he has a less than refined jump shot. And while he isn't a lights-out shooter or even much better than average, he has improved a pretty good amount in that area over his NBA career so far.
Yeah.
Last season, he posted career bests in a 80.5 free throw percentage, 35.1 3-point percentage. Once again, that's around average, but much better than before, and a 52.4 true shooting percentage. So he's getting there. He's definitely improving. The biggest problem now is really his shot selection.
Yeah.
The vast majority of Wall's shots are from mid-range, and very often they are of the off-the-bounce pull-up variety, which these are the least valuable shots in basketball, statistically speaking, and they make up such a large percentage of his shot attempts that if he can shift just some of those into continued drives to the rim or even threes, he should get even better.
Yeah, one guy who has gotten better is Bradley Beal, and I think he made a pretty significant jump in his sophomore year, improving his assist rate, lowering his turnover rate, and I think he did fairly well in an increased scoring role that made him the number 2 option for this Wizards team. Beal is one of the better three-point shooters in the NBA, averaging 40% from three for his career on a little over 4.5 attempts per game. And because of his athleticism, seriously, the guy's really athletic, and his strength and the respect that defenses give that jump shot, you'd think he'd be good at getting to the basket as well, but that's really not the case, as over 78% of Beal's shot attempts come outside of 10 feet, according to Basketball Reference. And then out of the top 50 scorers in the NBA by points per game, only Klay Thompson took fewer free throws. So that's kind of a problem. It's kind of a reverse John Wall thing where he can't really get to the basket, but he can shoot pretty well. Defensively, I think that Beal plays pretty fierce, tough man defense and is a solid, not really great, not really bad team defender. He sometimes makes the mistakes you'd expect out of a 20-year-old, but he was a 20-year-old last year. Still, you can tell that he puts forth a good effort out there. He actually cares about defense. And with his effort and athleticism and strength and how long he is, he's only 6'3", but he has a huge wingspan. I would not be surprised if he winds up being one of the better two-way perimeter players in the NBA in his prime. Having said that, Beal's going to be out for the rest of, not for the rest of this season. That's way too far. For the rest of this week. Didn't mean to startle any Wizards fans with that. He's going to be out for the rest of this week with a injured wrist.
Yeah. Usually when it comes to injuries, the name people associate that with on the Wizards is Nene.
Yeah.
And I've been a Nene fan for a long time. I lived in Denver for 5 years. When he was there, I had season tickets one year. And one thing that I always hated was I remember how much Nene always got an unfair proportion of the blame and an unfair proportion of the credit. It was always Nene doesn't rebound or Nene's soft. That never really sat right with me, as when what I saw was the opposite of a soft player and a poor rebounder. I've never been, so I can't really attest to it, but I have to imagine that it must take a lot to go through chemo and surgery in the battle against cancer. Imagine what it must be like doing that and then returning to NBA basketball in just about 2 months.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound soft to me.
No.
That's not soft. And the rebounding thing really speaks to how our perspective of basketball culturally really tends to emphasize results over process. Yes, Nene's not a great individual rebounder in terms of results, as he's never averaged over 7.8 per game in his career.
Mm-hmm.
But Nene is a great team rebounder whose teams are always Windexing the defensive glass much, much better overall when he's on the court than when he's not. And that's happened every year of his career to date.
Mm-hmm.
Boxing out is fundamental, people, and Nene is very good at it.
Yeah.
And in addition to all of that, he's a very savvy team defender and a very smart passer, too. So he brings a lot to the table.
Exactly. And I think that he and Marcin Gortat just mesh together so well.
Oh,
He's
yes.
sort of the proverbial basketball peanut butter to Nene's proverbial basketball jelly.
I like it.
Thank you. Nene boxes out a bunch of dudes so Gortat can gobble up the boards. Nene plays great interior defense so Gortat can go protect the rim. Nene operates in the high post in the mid-range area so Gortat can bang down low. So do you want to guess the top two-man combination in terms of like point differential for the Wizards last year? It's not Bradley Beal and John Wall. It's Nene and Marcin Gortat. They outscored opposing teams by almost 10 points per 100 possessions in the near 1,000 minutes that they spent on the court together last season. Nene is awesome for reasons that we've already gotten to, but Marcin Gortat is equally awesome, in my opinion. Is a glass eater. He can operate from the low and the high post. He can set great screens. He can kill in the pick and roll. He can step out and hit that 12, 13, 14 footer at a pretty consistent sort of rate. He can make his free throws pretty well for a big. He's not Klay Thompson or Stephen Curry out there, but it's respectable. And then he can anchor that defense and protect that rim. And with all of that in mind, that 5-year, $60 million contract, yeah, it sounds like a lot, but the salary cap's going up. I think it's an all right deal.
Yeah. And this core has a lot of really good pieces in it, but they also added a couple of people this offseason. They, of course, picked up after a certain wing left, which we'll address in a moment. They picked up a future Hall of Famer, Paul Pierce, to fit that role. Of course, Paul Pierce is nearing the end of his career, and he's not the same truth that he was for most of his career. But despite posting a career-worst 17.3 points per 36 in the lowest minutes of his career last year, on a step slower pace, Paul Pierce still brings a fair amount to the table. He remains a more than capable floor spacer from both mid-range and the three, and he's very capable still of breaking down a closeout defender and making something happen out of it. So I think he should still be a really good fit for this Wizards offense.
Yeah, and another guy, I like the addition of Chris Humphries. I think he's a pretty great fit behind Nene. He's a great rebounder who can face up from mid-range. And, you know, for a garbage guy to be able to shoot that shot, that's actually pretty nice. Humphries brings a lot of valuable skills off the bench, and he's really an effort sort of garbage man type guy who can be relied upon to make solid plays.
Yeah, and the Wizards did a good job of bolstering their front court depth with not only Chris Humphries, but also bringing in DeJuan Blair. And Blair is, of course, the winner of the NBA player who does the most with the least amount of ACLs award. But I similar to Humphries, I think he's going to give the Wizards another really strong individual and team rebounder to put in their big rotation and just kind of bolster that big depth.
Yeah, one thing that isn't going to be super bolstered is this team's presence of 3-and-D dudes because they lost Trevor Ariza. We kind of mentioned it a couple of times before, but this is going to be the biggest loss for the Wizards this year. Contract year, Ariza had an outstanding year as a 3-and-D guy for the Wizards last year, shooting almost 6 threes per game at a 41% clip, playing solid man and excellent team defense. And I think his game works really harmoniously with guys like John Wall, where John can just get into that paint when he isn't feeling all 17-foot pull-up-y, and then kick it out to Ariza in the corner, get that open shot going, get that ball movement going, and that's just a splash 4 times out of 10. So a lot of those kind of came on a silver platter. Ariza left for Houston, but with Paul Pierce and Otto Porter, I think that they should be able to pick up the slack and sort of fill in that gap pretty well.
Yeah, another person that left the Wizards this offseason was Trevor Booker. He, of course, went to the Utah Jazz. He provided the Wizards with solid rebounding and a pretty good finisher at the rim. But given the additions of Chris Humphries and DeJuan Blair, I don't think they're really going to miss him too much.
Yeah, no Beyonce. He's not irreplaceable.
Yeah, and another thing that they're not really going to miss too much is a lack of sleep this year.
Yeah.
there's something we track here called the rest differential. And it's basically just looking at a team compared to their opponents over the course of the season in how many road back-to-backs they play, how many 3 games and 4 nights they play, and how many 4 games and 5 nights they play. And the Wizards have a positive rest differential of 12, which just means that over the course of the season, they're going to be more well-rested than their opponents, which should be beneficial considering they have guys like Paul Pierce, Nene, Andre Miller, Drew Gooden's on the team.
Yeah.
They've got some older players and players who've had injury problems in the past, so that rest differential should help them kind of limit the risk somewhat of re-injury, and also help them be a little more consistent in their performances night in, night out.
Yeah, and speaking of consistency, one thing that we do consistently throughout every single team preview is our segment called 5 Questions, where I ask Josh a couple questions, he asks me a couple questions, and that just lets us talk about some stuff we otherwise maybe wouldn't have been able to get to. So I have the first question, and it's coming at you, bud.
Cool.
So given the subtraction of Ariza, the age of Paul Pierce, and the injury of Martell Webster, could we see Otto Porter and Glenn Rice Jr. really become major contributors for this team?
I think so. Obviously, both of those guys played really well in Summer League this past offseason. Both of them were first-team all Summer League, and Glenn Rice Jr. actually won the Summer League MVP. Rice Jr. is currently kind of still coming back from an ankle injury that he suffered in preseason, so he hasn't really been playing a whole lot, only about 8.5 minutes or so a game over about 5 games so far. But I think he will be able to eke out a slightly bigger role in the rotation once a little bit more healthy.
Yeah.
But Otto Porter is already kind of functioning as like the 6th or 7th man so far. He's at about playing half the game so far in the first 9 games, 24 minutes a game.
Yep.
He's really kind of getting all of those backup small forward minutes, and he's playing pretty well. He's a guy I was really high on in that draft class. He's not really the type of guy that goes on to become like a dominant star type player, but he's a killer glue guy that can do a variety of things very well that allows him to fit in with a variety of different lineups. So I think he'll definitely be able to continue his spot in the rotation. Glenn Rice Jr. should be able to get a slightly bigger one once more healthy. And I think these guys, along with Bradley Beal, are kind of the future of the Wizards on the wings going forward, at least for now.
Yep.
Now, we mentioned a little bit of, subtraction of Ariza, age of Paul Pierce, Martell Webster's injury. Injuries are something that could be a concern with this team, and with Nene and to a lesser extent Bradley Beal having injury concerns, 2 core pieces. Can this Wizards bench step up enough to prevent any catastrophe in the unfortunate yet somewhat likely event that one of them goes down for a significant amount of time?
I am pretty sure that they can. Actually, this sounds a little bit, maybe like a bit of a dissent to the popular opinion. I think if Beal goes down, they'll be okay. We mentioned Glenn Rice Jr., who can stroke that from 3 and
Otto
be a
Porter.
decent approximation and operate a little better off the bounce than Beal does. Not quite the defender that Beal is, but they're both, he's passable. So they have a decent replacement for Beal. You can't really replace Nene very easily, though. Chris Humphries can do some similar things on the court, but he isn't quite the team defender that Nene is. He isn't quite the post defender Nene is.
Isn't the passer.
No. So that would be a bit of a struggle. But I think that if Beal goes down, they'd be okay. They could eke out some wins and play relatively similarly.
I mean that's what's happened so far. I mean, they're 7-2, and Bradley Beal hasn't played a game yet.
Yep.
Yeah.
So speaking of 7-2, if this team continued it, they'd be a really good team that could maybe go far in the playoffs. Now, I don't think they're going to continue going 7-2 every single month, but is this the year that the Wizards finally get further than the second round since going to the finals in that 78-79 year?
It's possible, but I doubt it. Let's put things into context, people. I know they won against the Bulls, but those were the Bulls without any offensive threat, really.
Yeah, that was the BUL because half of them was gone.
In the playoffs, it's a lot easier to really hone in on offense and really shut down the primary actions and ideal things that an opponent does in a playoff series. And when that team doesn't really have any major offensive threats, it makes it pretty easy. And, defense wins championships, but you got to be able to score too. So them getting past the Bulls, in my viewpoint, is more of a circumstantial type thing than anything about the 6th seeded in the East Wizards being primed to explode as a contender in the East. That they're good. They're just, I don't think they're as good as, some of the national people, looking at you, Bill Simmons, have kind of touted them as. I think it's a little bit pyrite, fool's gold. They will be good enough to make the playoffs in the East, no question. They might even be good enough to maybe get first round advantage in the or home court advantage in the first round if things play out well. But another thing is the East isn't as weak at the top as people think it is.
No,
you've got the Bulls who are playing much better offensively now and still aren't at full strength. Once they are at full strength with the offensive additions they have, to me, they're the clear-cut favorite in the East. Then you have the Cavs are going to get themselves right at some point before the playoffs come. Mm-hmm. You've got the Hawks who are going to be sneaky good once again. Mm-hmm. You've got the Heat who are going to be better than people think they are. And, of course, there's Toronto who's just been killing it so far. So the East is still the Eastern Conference, but there are good teams there.
Yeah, it's not embarrassing.
The Wizards aren't one of the top 3 teams in that group, at least to me.
Yep.
So I don't think they do. Kind of speaking to that, the Wizards only have John Wall, Marcin Gortat, Chris Humphries on the books for the 2016-2017 season. We kind of know the answer already, but any ideas on what they might be doing with their cap space that year?
Well, option 1 is obviously Kevin Durant. And I think it's option 1 for a lot of people. But the Wizards actually have, of every team not named Oklahoma City, I'd say they probably have the best chance.
Yep.
It's
nice being the hometown team.
Exactly. That does help. And it's a nice little core, with the weakest position being that small forward position, at least in the way the team is currently constructed. And Kevin Durant, he makes a lot of sense on every team, but he makes a lot of sense on this team too. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be awesome for Washington fans. Having said that, in the likely event that Kevin Durant stakes, let's say you always try to bet on the field, essentially, when it comes to one team out of 30, So if he winds up on one of the other 29 teams, there are still other players in that draft class, or that free agency class, that could be useful. I'm looking at Ryan Anderson. It would be a really interesting fit down low next to Marcin Gortat. Al Horford would be a really killer sort of approximation who can do similar things, maybe even somewhat.
Yeah,
I think
he does it better than Nene. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
I love Nene, but Horford,
Horford's better.
Is a more complete player. Yeah.
And then Danilo Gallinari, who is
healthy. Yeah,
if healthy, that's kind of the knock. But if he can be healthy, He can shoot the lights out, and he can definitely play some solid defense for a team. So I think that there are a lot of ways they can go in that 2016-17 free agency class. And, they might re-sign a lot of their guys back. They might... Who knows? They have a lot of flexibility. It's a really good free agency class, and that looks to be what they're going to do down the road to sort of hopefully get that sort of elevate into that sort of next level. But can this core realistically become a true contender in the next couple of seasons?
There's potential for it, I think. Like we mentioned, their skill sets seem to mesh pretty well with that core. So Wall's not the greatest shooter, but Beal is. Mm-hmm. And Beal's not the greatest off-the-bounce dribble penetrator, but Wall is. Mm-hmm. And Gortat's a really good low-post guy. And Nene's a really good high-post, mid-range guy. Their skill sets seem to mesh pretty well. If they could get another really strong wing... Mm-hmm. To fit that small forward position. Maybe it's Paul Pierce this year. Maybe it's Otto Porter long term. Maybe it's KD in 2016 offseason. That would help a lot. The other part is I think what's really holding them back is their shot selection. And a large part of this is the players, but also the coach. Mm-hmm. And no offense to Randy Whitman, who got an extension, but his job kind of was saved by them getting past the Bulls. And like I mentioned previously, that was a little flukish in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sold that Randy Whitman is the guy to get them to contender status. But I think there is the possibility of them with the right piece at that small forward position and, a better offensive strategy to get higher quality looks. I think they could get there.
Yeah. So speaking of getting there, you just got to our segment we like to call 20, 50, 80, where we give predictions that we think are 20, 50, and 80% likely to occur during the course of the season. I'm going to be a ball hog and do my predictions first today. So I think that it's 20% likely that Bradley Beal makes the All-Star game. I think it could happen. He scores enough. He gets some rebounds, he gets some assists, he gets some steals. In terms of box score stats, which is what that stuff is mostly predicated on, Bradley Beal is kind of in that prototypical all-star guy. I mean, he could take Joe Johnson's all-star spot.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. I'm not saying this means that he's an amazing player right now, because the stuff he struggles at, which is primarily efficiency and getting to the rim and all that kind of stuff, isn't really going to be counted into for All-Star voting, but I think he could make it just on box score stats alone.
Yeah.
Then I think that it's 50% likely that this Wizards team wins 46 games. That's sort of 45.5 is kind of the over-under point for me. And I think that's about where they're going to be at, just because they had a couple guys who are really young that are going to get better. Hopefully injuries stay in check, but with guys like Nene and Bradley Beal, maybe not. I think that this is still a solid team, though, and that should be a respectable record for them that I wouldn't be too surprised by. Having said that, I think that it's 80% likely, actually I'm saying it's 100% likely, because I'm already seeing it, that the 7-2 record that the Wizards have at this time of filming has people thinking that this team is way better than they actually are, when in reality, 2 wins against Orlando, 2 wins against Paul George-less Indiana, who also didn't have George Hill or David West, Milwaukee, New York, and Detroit wins. That's not very impressive. If you can even remotely have a chance of making the playoffs in the East, you can beat those teams. So it really isn't all that impressive. And the 2 times this Wiz team played teams that were actually worth a damn, they lost by double digits. So,
yeah.
Small sample size, obviously, but I think we need to kind of lower our expectations a little bit. So I know it looks like, oh my God, 7-2, but in reality, it's 7 wins against bad teams and 2 losses against good teams.
So, good?
Nah.
Yeah.
You did what you were supposed to do. Congrats.
Yeah, to me, they're kind of like Rockets East.
Oh, yeah.
Where their record has everyone thinking...
Or like the Kings.
That they're going to be super... No, I think they're more Rockets.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Their record is really good, and people are like, oh, they're taking the step. They're going to become a contender. Look at the context. They've played pretty mediocre to bad teams so far that make up the majority of the wins. And when they have played good teams, either those good teams have been have either kicked their butt or they've been missing core players. So it's not really, they may be dominating in terms of point differential or win-loss records, but you got to look at the context.
Yeah, you're better if you go 5-3 against the Spurs and if you go 8-0 against the Sixers.
Pretty much, yeah. That leads into my 20, 50, 80, just because that's how it works.
Yes.
I think it's 20% likely that, all this said, the Wizards still get into the second round this year. And that's just because you never really know in the playoffs. It all usually comes down to matchups. If there's major injuries for another team heading into that playoff matchup, the Wizards could get past them. That said, I don't think it's overly likely, hence the 20%.
Yep.
I think it's 50% likely that John Wall makes his second straight All-Star game.
Yeah.
And I think it's 80% likely that, in fact, I think it's 100% likely, that any success that the Wizards have, any of it, is going to be primarily attributed to that backcourt of Wall and Beal, despite that front court of Nene and Gortat being much more impactful.
Yep.
In other words, Wall and Beal are the sexy picks, while Nene and Gortat are the blue-collar guys that are actually doing the work.
Pretty much. So is this team... You kind of gave your answers in the 5 questions, but if I'm going to start off with mine, I think this team is going to be about as good as last year. Kind of in that B-, C+, 45 wins
average.
Range. Yeah. Enough of a step above average where fans can feel okay about it, but not much more than that.
Yeah, I think they'll be good, especially when you factor in the East, but like I said, I don't think they're going to be a top 3, top 4 seed in the East. There are some Eastern Conference teams that at least I think are going to be better than the Wizards are. And I agree with you. I think they're going to be, about average league-wide. So when you factor in the Western Conference teams, if you look at their records, they'll probably be about league average. And, of course, in the East, that inflates it a little bit. But
yeah.
I think they're a good team, but they're not a great team.
Yeah. Hopefully, though, you thought this was a great video. Fingers crossed. And if you did, hit that like button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button. If you feel other way and can't express your opinions about this video in a thumbs up, thumbs down dichotomy, then type a little comment. Or if you feel some type of way about this Wizards team, you can do that too. If you did like this video, it would be awesome if you could share it on Facebook, Pinterest, I guess, Twitter, Reddit, carrier pigeon, email. And then also subscribe to be notified of our future team videos. So I think that wraps this up. Thank you so much for watching.
Take care, everyone.